Hello everyone and welcome to Design. This is a webinar that I held on our Discord server. It's about creature design and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. So I want to thank you everyone for coming along to this webinar. I highly appreciate it. I think this is going to be interesting because today we're going to be talking about creature design, basically the essentials to get started with designing creatures. So let me look here. This is going to be the outline, the table of contents. What is creature design? That's the first question that people will be asking. I will just very simply answer that. Number two is the purpose of creature design, because I don't think people really ask that question either. Number three is creativity from various sources, where you can basically take where you can create creature design from like different areas when you're essentially studying or when you're trying to find references and so on. Then you are going to be thinking a little bit more about like animal anatomy. I'm going to be talking about that and why that is important. Now, I will talk a little bit about reimagination and animal hybridization. And lastly, I'll show you guys some examples of some great creature designers. So, what is creature design? Creature design in the entertainment industry refers to the process of creating original, fictional, or fantastical creatures for use in films, video games, comic books, and other media. It involves conceptualizing and visualizing beings that may not exist in the real world, ranging from monsters and aliens to mythical beasts. So essentially, creatures aren't something that exists in our reality or our world. It's something different from like a normal animal. So it's not like a normal animal that we're used to seeing. So here's an example of like a Murloc from World of Warcraft, for example. This is Xenomorph from the Alien franchise. And then you have something like board games as an example here. This is like the Great Jagras from Monster Hunter. Someone made a 3D model and they made like a board game out of that, which I thought was really cool. Moving on, I will actually now talk about the purpose of creature design. So there's several things, and the first is emotional connection. And I think this is the interesting part about creatures. So creatures can evoke strong emotional responses, whether it's awe, fear, empathy, or humor. The design of a creature can elevate the emotional feeling of the narrative it wants to tell. So I find the emotional connection that you can kind of create with creature design, I find that in a way more extreme, or in some ways easier to do with creature than to say characters, because you can make a very cute little thing down here, for example, and find that a little bit harder to do with like a character design at times, you know, especially if it's just like a human design or something that looks very creepy or even like very gross, right? So you have all these like ranges here, and it's super diverse in terms of what you can create, which can be quite overwhelming for people, but that's why we're going to have this topic to talk about today. The next is character development. Basically, you can have a creature that can help with the character development. So some creatures play significant roles in shaping the protagonist's journey, acting as allies, adversaries, or enigmatic forces. So the typical thing that people tend to see is something from like Conan the Barbarian, where you have the hero fighting some sort of creature, some sort of beast in order to overcome his fears, or the beast is some sort of adversary. This is very, very classic, right? Like usually some heroes, they have to slay the dragon, and then, you know, the dragon is just there to be an enemy for the protagonist to defeat, right? But then you also have something like Jusant, which is a game I played a little bit recently. It's a wonderful game. I recommend checking it out. This guy here has like a little pet right here who doesn't seem very impressive or anything, super cute, but it does help this main guy because this little creature is magical and can do some pretty interesting things, helping this guy with getting past some hurdles. And then you have a great movie, I guess you could say it's like a franchise, and that is How to Train Your Dragon. And you have Toothless here, which is a very well designed dragon here. It's a pretty cool looking dragon, but it's also quite cute, but epic at the same time. And it's a dragon that starts out as kind of like enemies of this protagonist here. They're fighting each other, and then they become friends, and then they have a very strong bond. I recommend checking out the movies if you haven't seen them. Then you have world building, which I think is one of the things that artists love to explore when it comes to creature design. So a well-designed creature reflects the environment, culture, or ecosystem it belongs to, making the world feel more immersive and cohesive. So this is a snapshot from World of Warcraft, and it's basically like a huge hall here with like dragons holding some sort of meeting. And you can see like the design and the style and the visuals of these dragons seem to fit in line with sort of like the environment that they're taking up here. It's not a natural environment, it's a man-made looking environment, but the environment fits their size and all that, and they're framed by the environment. But you can also have, for example, creatures that feel like they are like natural animals in the world that they live in, which World of Warcraft has plenty of, because it's a MMO and has a bunch of creatures, so you can look into that. But then you also have creatures that feel unnatural in the environment that they're in. Take something like the monster from Stranger Things. Like monsters are usually like creatures that do not fit in the environment that they're occupying because they're unnatural, right? And then you have entertainment and spectacle. So some creature designs make for a big spectacle. Okay, so I think Godzilla is like a very interesting example of this, because Godzilla has been around for a long time, and I think a lot of people that don't know about Godzilla will look at it first and think, oh, whoa, big monster, this is epic. But once you actually jump into it and get to know about like Godzilla, it's more than just a spectacle, but the initial impression is that of a giant lizard creating an entertaining display. If people don't know about Godzilla, right, if you do some research about it, basically Godzilla is like a symbolic representation of chaos and atomic power, and there's a lot of like history behind it. It's not just some random design, there's actually quite a bit of depth to it. And there's a lot of redesigns being done for Godzilla as well. And for example, you have Shin Godzilla, which is pretty epic, or the American version of Godzilla as well, the one from 2014. Alright, so we're going to jump on to the next thing here, which is creativity from various sources. And the first thing that people are going to look into is, I would say, obviously, nature. Okay, so nature serves as an endless source of inspiration. Designers will study animals and even plants and insects and natural phenomena to create creatures that feel grounded in reality while also pushing creative boundaries. Okay, so we can't really create from a vacuum, and a lot of creature designers will look at animal designs or things from nature to use as inspiration. I don't think this is coming as a surprise to anyone, but it needs to be said anyways. And I'm gonna show some examples here. We have the great jaguars from Monster Hunter, and it's basically a big iguana. That's basically what it is. The elements that you can see, if you compare, like the jaw element here is the same, the back element here, the flaps is the same. What else? Like the actual overall color and shape is pretty much the same. Then you have Appa from Avatar. This one's a little bit more subtle, but you can see it's definitely taking inspiration from a buffalo as well. The nose shape, the head shape. And I will definitely say there's some other animals being mixed in there too, but buffalo is definitely one I can definitely see. And then we have mythology and folklore, and I think this one's really cool. So many creature designs are rooted in ancient myths, legends, and folklore from various cultures. Dragons, unicorns, and werewolves are prime examples of mythical creatures that continue to influence modern designs. So one of the things I used to do quite a bit when I was, doing a bit of creature design was that I really like Norse mythology, and there's a lot of like interesting, like weird creatures from Norse mythology. And I think one of the big ones that people know about is the Jormungandr, the big snake that wraps around the world. But here's some like classic old illustrations of like creatures from folklore. You have the classic werewolf. This is a dragon. It looks really weird. I don't think people are used to seeing like the old like illustrations of how dragons used to look like. They look like a mishmash of different things, not very blended. You have something like the chimera, which is from Greek mythology. You have the griffin, the harpy, and so on. And there are, if you look at games today, there's definitely like modernized interpretations of these like creatures from folklore. So you can definitely use these as inspiration, and you can look at like folklore or mythologies that people don't really talk about that much, and you can do some research in them and try and like interpret those creatures in your own way. Okay. So animal anatomy, this is very important. So designers often use real-world biology as a foundation, drawing inspiration from existing animals and even plants. Understanding skeletal structures, muscles, and movement is important for creating creatures that feel believable. even if they are fantastical. All right, so this is sketches done by Terrell Whitlash. Okay, so she's great, and I watched the movie My Brother Bear, and in that one, I know that a lot of the animators there, they definitely had to study a lot of like bear anatomy. And they didn't just study the surface parts of the bear, like the overall shape or whatnot. They actually studied how like the fur moves, how the anatomy looks like, the musculature. So they stripped off all the fur to try and look at like, okay, how does the muscles look like? And even the bones and how they moved, right? In order to animate them well. And the way that the bears are animated in that movie is different from like real bears because they're very expressive and they're more cartoony, right? So they had to do some changes. And here's some like other like quicker studies as well from pugs. And you can see the skeleton and the fox here. And it's all very useful stuff because I'll get more into that in a bit. So moving on, it may not seem obvious at first, but many animals share similar anatomical structures. This is the big part. Animals within the same class often resemble each other more closely. This is why humans have anatomy that is more similar to other mammals than to insects. So if you look at like class, like mammals, reptiles, birds, and so on, mammals will have similar anatomy to each other. Birds will have similar anatomy to each other. And even classes will have overlapping elements and some will have less overlapping elements. But just to compare here, I just have like mammal anatomy and like a little bird here, just as like a little example. So we have the bear anatomy, and if you just look at the arm, and comparing it to the human anatomy here, it's surprisingly similar. Okay, so this would be the deltoid right here. This is the triceps. This is the brachialis. This is the bicep. Tricep, brachialis, bicep, right? Pecs, pec here as well. So there is a surprising amount of overlap, and that's why I would say that when you're studying one animal, studying the next animal is actually not going to be as difficult because there's like overlapping elements, basically synonymous elements that's going to remind you of certain things. So remember that human anatomy is still used in creature design. Okay, just as a note, think of humanoid creatures like werewolves or the Minotaur, because creature design, I think a lot of people tend to think of something very animal, but we do take into consideration humanoid creatures as well, like I said, the werewolf, right? If you look at like the quadrupedal animals, these two here, one is, I think this is a cougar if I'm not wrong, and then this is a horse. And even though that they're two different animals, one is a herbivore and one is a carnivore, they have very similar anatomical structures, and the skeletal system is quite similar as well on the overall. But when it comes to subtlety and stuff, and then you have like the head and then the feet as well, that's quite different. But that's when you start to zoom in and really go for the details. Okay, so here you can actually see some interesting things happening. When we create our own creature designs, speculative anatomy comes into play. This is a lot of fun, especially if you're a person that's very creative and has like a strong need to create something new, right? We can take inspiration from life and from our previous studies and play around with the shape and forms to create something entirely new. Okay, so I think this is a pretty cool example. This is by R.J. Palmer. This is great. And I'm actually going to go back a little bit and just look at this bird and look at the chest of this bird and the arms here, and even like the legs, the muscular structure of the legs there. And then you look at this dragon again, you can see like the oversized pec muscle and the wing structure here is synonymous with the bird. Birds will generally have oversized pec muscles in order for them to take flight. That's an example of like how you can see like animal structure and functionality and use that in your own designs. Like even like the muscular of the leg here is quite similar to the birds, but then it has like other anatomical similarities with other animals, like probably a Komodo dragon, maybe like a cat, yeah, and a bunch of other things, because no one's seen a dragon. Dragons don't exist, right? So you can do what you want and you can mishmash different things together and see what works. This is one that I created myself, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So then we have Reimagination. I've actually talked about Reimagination. I made a YouTube video very recently. I recommend you guys check that one out because I actually go into depth with that. But I want to talk about it here because it's still interesting. So Reimagination means transforming an idea or concept into something fresh and innovative. In this case, we can take an animal we have studied and create something new. Okay, so here we have an orangutan. But what if we want to make something new, something different, like a new creature design? Well, we can take that thing that we have studied and we can change and play with those elements from, let's say, in this case, an orangutan. And let's say we take the face flaps, the mouth, and maybe certain parts of the proportions and just bend and play with it and push it in different ways. And then we have something new just from one animal. Instead of just like mixing different animals together, we create something new from just one animal. And that's why doing studies of specific animals can be quite fun for that reason alone. But I would say this is probably my favorite part of creature design, and that is hybridization. So hybridization is one of the most common methods used in creature design. It involves mixing different animals, plants, or elements to create a new creature. You guys have already been seeing this type of stuff before, but I don't know how in-depth people actually go with it. So generally there are two types of hybridization. You have mixed hybridization and composite hybridization. Composite hybridization in creature design combines traits from different sources while keeping each element distinct and recognizable, like a griffin with clearly separate eagle and lion features. Now this is done by Axel Sarwald, and he actually did the converse of a griffin. Instead of having an eagle head and a lion body, he had a lion head and an eagle body. And so you can very clearly see the distinction. Very clear lion head, very clear eagle body. It's very separate in that instance. And a lot of animals from folklore tends to be like this. Look at chimera, or the minotaur. Minotaur is basically human body and a bull head, so very straightforward in that regard. A lot of modern designs like to do the mixed hybridization because it blends traits so seamlessly that the original inspirations are difficult to identify. So creating a unified creature design, like a drake that subtly fuses a cat and lizard traits. So again, this is the one that I made here. I made my own little creature design. I tried to make it feel like it's like a real animal, and you kind of opening up like a animal book, like a prehistoric animal book, and you're reading through different animals, and this is one of them that would potentially pop up. So I have elements of a pteranodon and a blue-footed booby, and I mix them together, and I try to mix them really well together. I don't try to have the body of a blue-footed booby and the head of a pteranodon. No, I take different elements and I blend them together. I have the wing structure of the pteranodon, but I have basically feathers like a normal bird, I have the head structure as well that's similar to this animal, but it still has a lot of bird elements to it. So it's much more blended and subtle in that regard. Keep in mind, hybridization does not have to be exact. There is an element of reimagination and creative liberty that goes into the process of designing. So basically, what you can do is that you can take, let's say, 70% of one animal and 30% of the other, or you can just take 90% of one animal and 10% of the other. And then, of course, what you can always do is you add a little spice, you add that little extra, your own thing. That's the creative liberty that we have, because at the end of the day, we're artists. We can do what we want, as long as we make sure that thing that we're creating looks good, okay? That's our goal. Now, we're coming towards the end here, and I want to give some examples of some great artists I think you guys should look into. The first one is Stephen Oakley. I think he's a great creature designer. He has some fantastic stuff in there. He loves that stuff, you can tell. And he's worked on some amazing titles like Evolve and God of War. And I recommend checking him out. He's a little more realistic. He leans more towards realism. Yemin Kim, he's another one. I think he's great. He's kind of a mix of stylized and realism. And he does a lot of these cool insect creatures, both more animal-like and others that are more humanoid. And then you have Baldy Conan, and he's definitely leaning more towards stylized. He has more than just creatures. He has characters and props and environments, but he definitely does creatures too. So I recommend checking him out. Look through his portfolio. It's awesome stuff there. I highly recommend checking it out. Before I end this presentation, I want to give a nod to some of the courses that we have made. So these are just some stuff that I highly recommend you check out. So I have my own course that I have created, character design for video games. So if you guys actually struggle with creating designs, character design specifically from scratch, highly recommend checking this one out. This is very friendly for intermediate artists, people who feel like, they don't need a very simple introduction to things. They can definitely be pushed a little bit, but still keeping things very simple and basic. So you guys have like a very exact overview of what to keep in mind when you're creating a design from scratch. Then you have Hugh Teo. He has created Errors in Design. This is definitely more of like an advanced course that I highly recommend people to check out. These are basically common errors that you tend to see when designing. If you feel like you want to really level up your design skills, I highly recommend checking it out. There's not a lot of schools out there or other courses that go over design in depth as much as you, so I recommend checking that out. And then lastly, this one's, I would say if you're a beginner and you're actually starting out with drawing forms in space and trying to understand how to draw forms in perspective, this is kind of a must-have to understand, because if you don't understand how to draw forms in perspective, you're going to struggle with a lot of things. And cylinders is definitely one of them, because I use a lot of like cylinder forms when I am building my characters. Look at, like, for example, like the arms and the legs and the head. There's a lot of cylindrical forms that we use as like a basic structure. So I highly recommend checking this one out by Axel Sarwald. It's a fantastic beginner course. And that's pretty much it. I hope you guys enjoyed the presentation. Alright, so that's the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching all the way through the end. Remember guys, we have more content on our website. I recommend checking it out on design.com. We also have a Discord community. I recommend checking that out. And if you haven't already, remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and share this video around if you think someone will benefit from this. Thank you so much again, and I'll see you again soon.